So your house looks very nice. The greatest hits collection that just came out is called Our House, the very best of madness. And I thought it'd be fun to just sort of, since it's a retrospective, to like talk about certain tracks from it,
Yeah.
ones that meant a lot to me. And the obvious one, and career highlights as well. I have a couple ones that I'm very excited to ask you about. But the obvious starting point would be, because it is the title track of the compilation and because it was your biggest hit here in America, where I'm at, is Our House. Was there a house? Was there a specific house that inspired this song?
Yeah, I mean, it was Carl, the other singer from the band, who wrote the lyric to that song. I remember at the time I'd written a song called Baggy Trousers, and we were talking about where and how we were brought up. We thought we might do a concept album about that. And then Carl wrote Our House, and then nobody else wrote another song in that concept. So the concept went out the window. But there was a house, yeah. And I was thinking recently, what struck me sort of was the word our, because it could have been my house and it could have been your house, but our house. And obviously there was that Crosby, Stills, Nash song, you know, our house is a very, very, very fine house. But it still resonates, that idea of our house. Yeah, it's a nice thing. Yeah, yeah, where we're all like safe. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, didn't that song just get used in an advert over there in England that sort of is all about that?
It did exactly. Because during the lockdown, everyone's been in their houses, and so they started this campaign to send videos of people singing that song, doing up their houses while they've been in lockdown. And yeah, it created a bit of a more than just an advert. It created a sort of moment.
Hmm.
Thousands of people sent their videos in. Yeah, and as I say, it's funny because you don't know after all these years what impact these songs are going to have, but that song still has a big impact.
Did what was this concept album though? It's not too late. You could still do it. Write a few
Ah,
more house songs.
it was about growing up as kids, you know, and but ironically, we wrote a lot of songs about that anyway, so it didn't really need a concept album. But it was just funny that we all agreed, and then nobody turned up with a song other than Our House about how we lived when we were kids. So that
Well,
never got off the ground.
well, you did have another house song, House of Fun,
Yeah,
and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this that I only realized it now, but in doing research for this interview, I the double entendres of this song completely
yeah.
went over my head. I thought it was a song about carnivals, fun houses, magic shops, magicians, wizards. I did not get what this song was actually about.
No, yeah, we found that out ourselves. You know, we were playing in Ireland, and I remember it got banned because what they call it, Durex and all that was not allowed. You know, in Ireland at that time. You know, it's not that long ago. It's hard to imagine, but prophylactics, yeah, um, yeah, and yeah. So Lee wrote the song, yeah, and there was a film called The Summer of '42. It was about a kid going in the drugstore. What he wants to do is buy some Durex. He just can't bring the words to his lips. So he asked for a lollipop. He asked for an ice cream. He asked for, because it wasn't the same in England. Our chemists, what we call, were very, very straightforward hospital sort of derivation. Whereas drugstores in America are a completely different story. But anyway, it's just this kid going through his lexicon of words before he can get to kind of buy some Durex.
So if I'm understanding it now correctly, many years later, it is about a teenager who is trying to buy condoms at a drugstore. I'm interpreting for American, American
Oh, there you
languages.
go. Condoms, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
condoms were not allowed in Ireland. Is that what you're saying? Like for sale, or you weren't allowed to sing about them?
No, not at that point, because I remember we were on stage with Krista Berg, who was doing My Lady in Red or something very nice. And we started throwing out our branded condoms into the audience. And all of a sudden, the concert got stopped. And it was like, no, you can't do that. Because at that time, what is the other word for condoms? You know,
Rubbers.
yeah, no, I know that. I know that. I know that. But girls can take the pill kind of, what do you call it? You know, when you don't want to
Birth
get,
control.
yeah, what's it called?
Birth control.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That'll do.
Okay.
That'll do.
Okay.
And that was anyway. That was a bit of a revelation to us. Yeah, but having said that, you know, a lot of our songs have that sort of hidden deeper meaning. I think it was Nile Rodgers once said that. HDM, yeah, hidden deeper meaning. And we didn't even know that at the time often what we were saying, but we were saying something more than just. And a lot of the times we were doing songs that sounded happy, but they'd have a sadness. And equally, we'd do songs that sounded sad, but they would have like upbeat music. So it was a funny old combination.
Well, what other songs had what was it? Deeper DHM, Deeper Hidden Meaning. What other songs?
Embarrassment, you know, which is just a song about, you think, a relationship, but in fact it was about Lee, our saxophone player's sister, had a baby with a black guy, and in those days in this country, you know, it was kind of frowned upon. And you know, you think about Black Lives Matter and all that now, but they called her an embarrassment, you know, some of his relations, his aunties and uncles. And again, you know, it just sounds like an upbeat pop song, but in fact it's about the struggles that she was going through, bringing up a black child in a community where it was still kind of frowned upon. Anyway, I found this check the other day, talking about America. I can't believe my luck. You know, we never had it too good in America, you know that?
I did not know that. To me, you were on MTV like all the time, and obviously
$27.56. Now, come on.
Congratulations. Where will you spend it first? At the House of Fun?
Make sure you sign it within the lines or it's not actually cashable. And I think there's another one here. Yeah, 134 and 80 cents.
It's going up. It's moving up. You can, you know, go to the chemist. Go to the chemist and buy your lollipops. Well, that's actually, I do want to ask about that, because that actually is surprising to me, because my perception is that Madness were huge in America, because I grew up with MTV and you were on MTV all the time. But I do want to make sure I ask a little bit more about Embarrassment, because I think that's a very interesting story. What was the reaction to that song at the time that it came out? Did people get what it was about? Was that controversial?
Not really controversial, but it took people a little time, a bit like what you said about House of Fun. You know, it took people a little time. But we had the great privilege. We were working with bands like the Specials and the Selector, who were very, you know, political with a capital P. And the whole thing of racism was really becoming very potent in England at that time. And then bit by bit, people started to understand what that song was about. But it took a little time. Yeah, it wasn't controversial, but it was just, we were trying to explain that we came from somewhere where it was still a struggle. You know, it wasn't just like we were, you know, in this beautiful liberal utopia. You know, it's really hard around where we were. People were very on each other's cases about where you were from, who you were, whether you were Latin or Irish or Scottish or black. You know, there was a lot of that going on, of course, which there still is.
Yeah.
So it was just our small gesture in that direction, you know.
Has that song or other songs from not just you guys, but from the two-tone era, from that ska era, do you feel like they've taken on new meaning or renewed meaning, some kind of revival in, you know, the current age, the Brexit age? As you mentioned, this stuff is still very much going on in England and here.
Yeah, I'd certainly say with two-tone, you know, that was the first time I can remember black and white kids being in the same bands. I mean, you know, we were kind of like a bit out because we didn't have any black people in our band, but we were playing music of a black origin for sure. You know, we were playing reggae and ska, and that was the kind of music we liked. But up to that point in England, there weren't very many black and white kids playing together. And all of a sudden, it seemed like there could be a little bit more communication between those two communities. And I think that did have some resonance. And I think it is today. You know, I have great optimism. I mean, you've got this big case coming up, haven't you, with your man?
George Floyd case, yeah.
I think my daughters, for instance, and the next generation don't see any of that. You know what I mean? And I hope that we had some part to play in the doing away with all of that, you know.
Going back to a little bit of a lighter subject, I started off by asking about your two house songs, Our House and House of Fun.
Yeah.
My favorite television show of all time is The Young Ones.
Of course.
It's brilliant. And those songs got to be performed by Madness twice. You got to be on 2 episodes. I don't know if there was any other band that got to be on The Young Ones twice, but I remember both episodes vividly. Tell me your memories about being part of it. It was such an iconic show. They showed it on MTV every Sunday night, and I never missed it.
Well, there was 2 things there, right? You know, it's a long time ago now, but I remember it was like you had this, what we called a new wave, which was sort of pop music coming out of punk with still something to say. And then you had a new wave of comedy, you know, and you had Monty Pythons and all that, but all of a sudden this new generation of comedians were coming out really kind of out there, and they showed the young ones, and they wanted to have a band on every week, and we were just friends of theirs. I used to go and see them in small clubs and all that, Rick Mail and all that. And so he said, our house was a hit. I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, what do you mean, what do we want to do? He said, well, if you perform on the show, what is the thing you would most like to do? And Lee, our saxophone player, said, I'd like to get a load of police vans, right, and beat them all up with baseball bats. And they said, fine. So that's
Amazing.
And then House of Fun, of course, yeah, you hum it, I'll smash your face in, yeah. And then we all swapped instruments and made a sort of joke of the whole thing of being a performer. But mainly it was that, yeah, just do what you want to do. And that is a very, fun way to promote yourself. You know, most of the time you're being told what to do. This was a time when they just said, do what you like, yeah. So I remember we had all these baseball bats and sledgehammers made out of polystyrene, and we were beating up policemen just because it seemed like it'd be more fun than standing there playing our instruments.
That's kind of interesting because we were just talking about how, you know, dark things that are going on in this country. And there was, you know, that is an interesting scene to look back at. You know, you guys beating up the policemen, you know, I don't even remember that part, but I'm going to have to go back on YouTube.
I'm not saying we didn't, you know what I'm saying? Take it to mind, I always say.
Weren't Madness supposed to have their own TV series at one time? I've read that.
Funny enough, yeah, it was the guys who wrote The Young Ones, Richard Curtis and Ben Elton, wrote a TV show for us. We were supposed to be the Parliament. I was going to be the Prime, and they were going to be all the... And we did a couple of pilots, which were really funny, but the BBC said it's going to cost too much money and they couldn't, or we were too much trouble. I can't remember one or the other. But it was a shame, yeah, because it was going to turn out that Margaret Thatcher was a Martian. She got flown back to Mars and we were going to take over the Parliament. And we had a lot of funny stories to tell. But who knows, you know, because it was like the Beatles had kind of done it, and we were kind of in that mold, you know, of people who could had charisma, or whatever, apart from just being musicians. When you see the videos, which was the other derivation of that. But I think in one way it was kind of good, because if we had gone down that path, we would have possibly ended up like the Monkees, doing TV shows when we were actually much more interested in doing music and being ourselves, yeah. But yeah, there's some pilot out there. I think it's on YouTube somewhere of us doing our
Note to self, check YouTube immediately after this interview, because that's, I mean, I understand why maybe you think that wouldn't have been the best long-term career move for Madness, but oh my God, I would have watched the hell out of that.
You know what I'm saying? I've got no regrets, but on the other hand, I think, well, you know, it's meant to be. But it was funny. We're supposed to end each show. We've got to go and see the Queen, and she goes, "What have you learned?" We go, pretty much all.
Well, you got to, did you get to meet the Queen when you performed on the roof of Buckingham Palace in what was it, 2012? You did that? That's a pretty amazing thing to do. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, I told it before, but it's an old joke. An old comedian years ago said to the Queen, "Excuse me, Mum, you're not supposed to speak to her before she speaks to you." And she said, "Yeah, what?" Tommy Cooper, his name was. And he said, "Are you into football?" And she said, "Not really." So he said, "Well, can I have your cup final tickets, please?" Anyway, I said the same joke 50 odd years later. And she said, "That's Tommy Cooper. I've heard that before." She's got a very good memory. But yeah, who knows? You know, we ended up on the roof of Buckingham Palace. We never imagined in a million years that would happen to us, and it did. So yeah.
And then that same year, you performed at the London Olympics, right? Was the most British thing ever, and the best thing ever.
Yeah, exactly, and that really was a privilege, yeah, because you know, we were going through all that, you know, and then you know, I know, but it's great to be reminded of the fact London is a big melting pot. You know, we're all Mongols in this city, right? Nobody is really one race or another, you know what I mean? And the Olympics coming to London really cheered the whole place up in a great way. Yeah, really great way. I remember, like, You got the Jamaican team who are all hanging about in Brixton. You got, like, you know, the Cubans are hanging about in Hackney. Everyone's finding their own little demographic. Within London, you can find anybody you want, whether they're Serbian or Romanian or whatever. Every person that come from all over the world found a little spot. And then to play at the closing ceremony was a real privilege, yeah.
Wow. Speaking of football, I have read that your fascination with football almost got you kicked out of Madness at one time.
Yeah. Yeah, I was very much into football. And, you know, we had this very bizarre kind of scenario called hooliganism, where you would chase people down the road because they lived in the street next door, you know, which I think they're called county lines or something now, or postcode crime. And it was just stupid, but I liked it. You know, it was a sort of funny rite of passage, and you would just run around, and it wasn't really anything terrible would happen, but you might, on occasion, you know, get a policeman's helmet or do something that, you know, was a bit outrageous. But I started to go to football on Saturdays, and then they saw me on the television when I was supposed to be at rehearsals, and I was in a close-up of some football match, and then I got sacked out of the band. But that was the turning point for me when I realised that, you know, it's more important to me to be in the band than being an idiot. You know what I mean? I've done all that.
So we've talked about a lot of things on the screen, this sitcom or this bizarre TV show you're going to do, which I would still green light if we could make that happen now. I'd be into that. We talked about the House of Fun and our house being on the Young Ones, but going back, it was interesting when you said that you guys were never big in America, because I saw you guys on MTV all the time. One of the first MTV used to use the beginning of One Step Beyond, the like, don't watch that, watch this. They use that in their commercials on MTV.
Yeah, well, not that we weren't, you know, not that we were completely unsuccessful. I mean, Our House was a big hit. I think It Must Be Love was quite a big hit, but we'd had sort of like 14 singles before that and a bit of One Step Beyond. But there were two things that were going on. One was we weren't going to America enough really to make it happen. You know, that was our own fault. But also just, it was like punk was a little bit later, you know, in America and ska was much later. By the time you got to sort of No Doubt and all that, we were kind of like established in England in a way that we didn't really want to travel too much anymore. So it was just one of them things, you know. Do
you think it was, I mean, obviously you had some great success here, but do you think it was a bit too English? Because I saw a funny clip on one of your YouTube videos. I think it was the YouTube video for One Step Beyond that said, this video is so British, I just looked at my toast and beans appeared on it. So there were all sorts of comments like that. And, you know, it was a time in America where a lot of British bands were dominating our charts, but even by those standards, like Madness were very, very British in the way like bands that came later, like Pulp, are very British, or Blur's Park Life is very British.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yeah, because, you know, we had a sort of dichotomy that we were in the ska kind of thing with the Specials and Selector, but in fact, you know, we were equally moved by the Kinks and Ian Dury and the Beatles and what you call British pop music. So we were kind of in a funny little place of our own, and maybe it was too British, whatever that means. But yeah, the sensibility we were trying to express didn't seem to connect completely with Middle America. Let's put it that way. When I see the guys in their red leatherette all-in-one suits, you know, My Sharona and all that, it didn't really resonate with us. No.
Well, you had a lot of success here, and as I mentioned, you were all over MTV. My first memory of Madness was actually the One Step Beyond video, which is maybe not super representative of your sound. That you don't sing on that song, I believe. You know.
Nope.
I discovered your vocals later, but that video is so iconic. But besides the fact that as I mentioned, MTV used it in their promos.
Yeah.
The fact that it was a mainly instrumental song of just all this like very compelling dancing, it was even at that time stood out. Tell me about that video. Who were all the people dancing in it? It's an amazing video.
It's funny you should mention that, ironically, because there's an American guy who directed that video that we met through Stiff Records, the label we were on at the time. And he'd just done the video for Devo. I don't even remember Devo. who'd just done a funny version of Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. And the video was just absolutely out there. There's a baby coming out of a cot that sticks a fork into a toaster and then sets itself alight. And it was just, well, we've got to get this guy. So he just came on the road with us and we just filmed ourselves in very strange streets in England, you know, with washing lines and all that. And we were doing that funny old dance that we were doing.
Who were the people?
But surreality was part of the thing, you know, surreality. And it's hard to explain, but we were very self-deprecating. You know, it's like we took what we did very seriously, but we didn't take ourselves very seriously. And I remember that just being a great, very exciting time. And we were, and also into dancing, but, you know, because we come out of punk where everyone was jumping about and spitting at each other. We actually like dancing, which was a sort of new thing for honkies. And we were dancing, man, yeah. We just happened to be in the right time at the right place where MTV suddenly would come out of nowhere. We were making these funny little films and all of a sudden they were being shown in a worldwide context, but that hadn't happened up until that point. And then MTV, of course, went on to be more important almost than the recordings, you know, at a certain point. People were putting more money into their promos than they were into the recordings. You know, you think of Michael Jackson and all that, you know, with the videos he was making.
Chuck Statler, does that sound familiar?
Statler, there you go.
Chuck Statler.
Chuck Statler. What else did he do? He did the Devo ones. Can you see what else he did?
Sure, yeah. Chuck.
He must have done other things because he was hilarious. Yeah, he was brilliant.
Chuck Statler, director. I could see the through line there. He did, you're listed here. He did Elvis Costello.
There you go.
Graham Parker, Nick Lowe, Suicide Commandos, Pere Ubu. I'm actually completely like curious now, like, because I'm a big music video geek.
He was a real pioneer. Yeah, he was somebody that you thought he can understand. Yeah, that you know, it's not just, it's like, it's funny making a fool of yourself, but you have to do it seriously. Do you know what I mean? You have to put your all into it. And he got it, definitely, yeah. When
you guys were starting out and, you know, MTV debuted almost exactly 40 years ago, August 1st, 1981, which is crazy. I mean, obviously, no one knew what MTV was going to be. I don't think people knew what music video was going to be, but, you know, you were very much at the forefront making these videos that were very iconic and very made, you know, very fun to watch. Like, did you kind of embrace the medium on? Did you kind of know early on? Did you know, like, oh, this is something we really need to, like, pay attention to?
Well, there was two things. One was we were all extroverts, you know, like I say, a lot of bands aren't. You know, I remember talking to Paul Weller and people going, they found it a real struggle because it wasn't their thing. You know, whereas for us, dressing up and messing around was like, just, we really liked it. But it coincided with the fact that there was this very serious theatrical costumier in Camden Town called Berman and Nathans, and they were doing like Laurence Olivier movies, and so we get the real gear. Like when we dressed up as policemen, like we had the real gear. Like, can you imagine? For 2 days, we're wandering about the streets dressed as policemen, driving everybody mad. And yeah, we really got into it. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Yeah, you know, dressing as flowers, bumblebees, cowboys, you name it. We dressed up, but we really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Do you think people took you seriously at the time? You mentioned how it probably, in retrospect, was good that a full-on TV show didn't happen because then you would have gone down that lane. But do you think because your videos were so wacky that there may have been people who didn't take you as seriously as they should have?
I think that's a good point. I think that's true. Yeah, I do. That was years later. I mean, we did an album called The Liberty of Norton Folgate about 4 years ago. And all of a sudden, like what you call the broadsheets in this country, like serious papers, are talking about us in a way that they didn't back then. No, they kind of did see us as a joke. But I always remember, like, I get bands like trying to do a cover version of House of Fun, for instance. They go, I didn't realise how flipping complicated that song is. You know, what sounds, it's a bit like the old duck with her feet under the water, isn't it? You know, we did put a lot of work into all of it. And I think, yeah, there might have been a bit of these videos are so funny and hilarious that maybe the music isn't that important. But I think equally now, I think, you know, I can see those videos ending up in like the V&A Museum as works of art. I do. I think they're unbelievably fantastic.
Absolutely. Did you say who Chuck Statler in the video for One Step Beyond? I might have gone distracted because I was looking up his
Yeah.
information. Who the dancers were, who that were doing all these iconic moves in that video?
They were just friends of ours. They were just friends of ours. You know, some of them were cool and some of them weren't, but that wasn't the point. We showed the cool and the uncool, and that was it. You know, there was Joe Knightley, right? It's the one who was really out of time. We called him Joe Knightley.
I didn't know he was out of time at the time. I just thought I almost felt like you guys sped up the tape or something because it was like
The guy,
so.
Prince Nutty, who's another friend of ours. They were just friends of ours, yeah, who happened to be hanging around on the day. But yeah, there was no sort of choreography. It was just that's the way people were dancing at that time, or our friends were.
Wow. So am I correct in saying that in terms of just commercial success out of that second wave of British ska in the late 70s, early 80s, that Madness were the most successful band here
I don't know.
commercially?
Honest.
I
I
think,
don't,
I mean, obviously, the specials were successful, and then Fun Boy 3 after that English beat were successful here. But
I don't know. I
I
don't
think
know.
Madness might have been the most. Well, I guess I do think that was the case, but obviously you had some big success here. So I'm wondering that despite all the things we're saying about how there might have been too Britishness or certain campiness to the videos, in general, you did succeed in America in a way that some of your peers did not. So what do you think it was about Madness that was, that now you're in the money with all these checks and stuff from your, from America? So you were doing something right. Yeah, congratulations again on that.
I think the date might have run out on this one though. I've just checked it. I think I had to cash it before 12.99.
Uh-oh. Are you serious? That's actually like a 22-year-old. Is that actually a check from 1999?
It would look that way, yeah.
That is hilarious. Well, I guess it expired, but you can.
Yeah, maybe. I remember we got a lot of nice reviews, you know. I remember playing the Hollywood Bowl in sort of mid-80s or something, and people were going, we really dig what Madness are doing. I think, you had this really weird sort of thing. You had like the Squeeze or whatever, Squeeze. Remember, you had all these really sort of interesting, different kind of derivations of British pop music. And as you say, and then Pulp come along, or the Arctic Monkeys. I think somebody at some point realised we were sort of in that frame, of songwriting. And I always remember saying, like, we're just from London. I'm not from another planet or something, but London is a very specific place, and we talk about it in that context. I remember seeing the Buena Vista Social Club, that Cuban band, and realizing that's where they're from Havana. Do you know what I mean? You can tell by the way they look and the way they sound, and that's sort of who we are. We're from London. It's not a better place, it's not any better than anywhere else, but it's certainly where we're from. Yeah.
How do you feel about where London's at right now? I haven't been there since 2018, but obviously what was going on with Brexit kind of coincided with stuff here.
Very difficult. I mean, the only optimism I've got is that hopefully the property price collapsed. It just got too much, property. I seen it in the 70s when there were squats and empty buildings. I remember Chrissy Hines saying it's the best place to be in the world, in London, because you could rehearse, you could play in pubs, and all that sort of went. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot of empty property in the next couple of years because they can't rent it out. They were charging too much money. That maybe the kids, the rave thing came back in the 80s for the very same reason. All of a sudden there were empty warehouses and car parks where you could have your own event. Maybe that comes back, hopefully.
Do you think there's any particular tracks? We mentioned Embarrassment. Are there any other tracks by Madness that you think have taken on new life in current times?
Yeah, It Must Be Love. I think that took over from Whitney Houston in funerals, what they play. What was that? I Will Always Love You. I think It Must Be Love has now taken over as the song that they play when they're pushing the coffin into the fire. So that took on new meaning, yeah.
Okay. Do you have any idea how? I was not aware of that it had and like how did that happen? Why did that become a funeral song?
Sentiment. And you realize sometimes, for sure, for me, you hear blues records or old reggae records, and they're often very, very simple sentiments. And sometimes you're overcomplicating the whole flipping thing. You know, it must be love, love, nothing more, nothing less. Love is the best. And you go, who's going to go for that? Only everybody. Of course they are. Yeah. So now weddings and funerals, apparently, yeah, it must be love, which we didn't even want to record at the time, but it just seems to resonate more now than it did then, and there's nothing wrong with that.
You didn't want to record it. That's interesting. Obviously, it's a cover, although I think a lot of people might know your version. A lot of people, especially of a certain age, know your version more.
Yeah.
Why didn't you want to do it, and what made you change your mind?
Well, as I say, we were going up the words, nothing more, nothing less. Love is the. I said, who's going to want to hear that? But our boss at the record company said, if that don't get in the top 3, I'll give you my record company. And I think it got to number 4. So we never did get to own Stiff Records. But yeah, it was just such a simple sentiment. But now I see families and all that singing along and crying, and yeah, it has taken on a new life, that particular song.
How did it end up? It's funny how so many questions I asked you end up going back to moments that happened on the screen, because it was very iconically featured in The Tall Guy. It's one of my favorite song syncs ever. Yeah. And you actually are in that film making a cameo. How did that placement happen?
Well, again, it was that Richard Curtis who tried to write us a TV show, and then he wrote the script. And again, he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to look like someone who's just been blown up. He said, why? I said, just the way I feel, you know. So it just made me look like I've been blown up for no particular reason. But when you see the first sequence of that, thinking about it, it must be love, right? It's me in a grave with the rest of them looking down on me, throwing leaves on me. I never thought I'd miss you. And that's how it goes.
Amazing. So I guess since we're on the subject of things that happened on screen, along with this Our House, The Very Best of Madness compilation, there's another career retrospective coming out. I hope it'll be available to watch in America. It's coming out in May. Is your documentary Before We Was We, Madness by Madness. I feel like we're having our own little documentary here because I'm learning so much. But what can we expect from this documentary? Tell me all about it.
It was the 40th anniversary, I think, last year or the year before. And we were like, you know, they wanted to do a book. And then we were talking about, well, like, we kind of explained everything. I don't know how it came up. Just said, why don't we talk about how we got to 1979, you know, before we was we, how we got to know each other. I mean, you know, we were kind of all famous as kids, right, around our way. Mr. B, Kicks, you know, me, Suggs, everybody knew us. You know, we didn't really even need fame. But then it started to happen. And so we did a book, and then this documentary maker said, I'd like to make a documentary on the same, because it's rare that, normally I do all the talking, but to talk to the drummer, talk to the bass player about what he felt, talk to the guitarist about how he thought about me. And of course, you all contradict each other, and it made for a much more interesting context, I think. And it's going to be 1 hour, then it was 2 hours, now it's 3 hours. But there's lots of lovely old footage of London at the time we were growing up, which was just, you know, pretty wildly rough, you know. I mean, not going on about it, but it was pretty grey. And I think they've done a great job of it. But in fact, I'm doing the premiere tomorrow in Leicester Square, right, which is all the big cinemas. But we found the smallest cinema in the world, which is a van with one seat in it. Right? And we give a competition to all our fans. So we've got one person. I'm going to take the tickets. I'm going to be the usherette. I'm going to serve the ice cream for our premiere in Leicester Square.
Are you being serious? This is happening? It's
tomorrow, yes. But I don't know how people get to see it. I don't know what platform it's on at the moment, this documentary, but it's good. Yeah, I think it's very good.
You got to come over here with a van and do a premiere at like Hollywood and Highland in front of the Chinese theater or something. I'll show up.
China. What's it? China. Yeah.
Yeah, the Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. That's everyone could cosplay as Madness. It would be good times.
Really red carpet like that.
Well, I'm very excited to see that, but I'm also excited. Well, first of all, I'm excited. I'm going to go on YouTube and try to find this pilot and try to get someone to green light more episodes.
Yeah.
Because that sounds exciting. But what's obviously everyone in music's in sort of a holding pattern in terms of live touring and things like that. But what's next for Madness? Do you have new music coming out or anything like that?
We've got a few things in the pipeline. Yeah, we've been trying to do something online, you know, and I wasn't that excited about it, but it looks like we've got something that could be exciting. We've got a few comedian friends of ours. We want to do something a bit like The Shining, you know, make it very obvious that we're playing in an empty space, you know. So we're trying to do that. Might be in the next few weeks. We've been writing a lot of new songs, but we're just hanging on like everybody else to find out if we can play live, you know. I don't think there's any way you can do social distance concerts apart from the Flaming Lips in bubbles and all that. I did have this idea, you could have sort of inflatable rubber rings, you know, a metre wide, and we could all stay 2 meters apart from each other. It didn't take off. But no, we're just waiting to go, man. We've got so many gigs backed up from the last couple of years. I don't even know anymore. It'd be like the Beatles. We've got to do 5 gigs a day just to catch up with the backlog.
You could do,
of course, yeah.
You could dress it, you could put the audience in giant prophylactics and then do House of Fun.
There we are.
I'm full of marketing ideas. These comedians that you mentioned in the Shining style live stream you're going to do, are they anyone associated with that Young Ones world? Like they Nigel?
Might at the moment, I just can't say because we're not allowed to. But yeah, who knows? Who knows? Something along them lines, you know, something surreal. Yeah.
Well, that's something to look forward to. In the meantime, there's the documentary. There's Our House, the Very Best of Madness, and there's your big premiere in Leicester Square with the ice cream. And yeah, I've just really enjoyed speaking with you, Suggs. Thank you so much for joining me from sunny England, and stay safe out there.
Nice to speak to you.